welcome to On This Day in Tudor History with me, Claire Ridgway. Now, today I'm taking you back to the reign of Queen Mary I. For on this day in Tudor history, the 18th of October 1555, Elizabeth, daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, finally received permission from her half-sister, Queen Mary I, to leave court and to travel to her own estate at Hatfield, rather than return to house arrest in Woodstock. Elizabeth, the future Queen Elizabeth I, had been treated with suspicion by Mary and her council since Wyatt's rebellion in early 1554. Historian David Starkey says the rebellion led to the most dangerous and difficult time of her life, when she feared imminent execution or murder. She even expressed a preference as to how she should die, like her mother, by the sword rather than by the axe. Elizabeth had been arrested and taken to the Tower of London in March 1554, following the failure of Wyatt's rebellion. She was imprisoned in the royal apartments of the Tower's royal palace, the same apartments in which her mother had spent her final days in May 1536. Elizabeth was interrogated several times by members of Mary's council, but never implicated herself and kept affirming her innocence. When rebel Thomas Wyatt the Younger went to the block in April 1554, he exonerated her in his execution speech, saying, "And whereas it is said and whistled abroad that I should accuse my Lady Elizabeth's grace and my Lord Courtenay, it is not so, good people, for I assure you, neither they nor any other now in yonder hold or durance was privy of my rising or commotion before I began, as I have declared no less to the Queen's Council, and this is most true." Elizabeth was released from the Tower on the 19th of May 1554, the anniversary of her mother's execution. But she was not a free woman. She was escorted to the Palace of Woodstock in Oxfordshire and kept under house arrest there. She was treated well, but she was not to converse with any suspicious person or be allowed to send or receive any correspondence. Elizabeth managed to stay connected with the outside world through her loyal servant Thomas Parry, who was in charge of her accounts. He'd been removed from Woodstock on the Queen's orders, that is, Woodstock Palace, but he didn't move far, staying at the Bull Inn in Woodstock. Elizabeth's servants would visit him on the pretext of discussing household business with him, and of course they could carry information between him and Elizabeth. In April 1555, Elizabeth was summoned to court to attend the Queen, who was expected to give birth soon. The baby never came. It was a false alarm. The sisters were able to reconcile, and it was Elizabeth who was at Mary's side as she tried to keep up the pretense of her pregnancy, and when her husband Philip of Spain deserted her to take up the reins of his abdicated father Charles V. Finally, on this day in history, the 18th of October 1555, after over 18 months of being watched by her sister and her council, Elizabeth was granted permission to go to Hatfield. Hatfield was her own estate, and she'd spent a lot of her childhood there. At Hatfield, Elizabeth could be her own woman and surround herself with people she loved and trusted. Thomas Parry joined her, as did her former governess, Cat Ashley. Thomas Parry joined her, as did her former governess, Cat Ashley, as soon as she was released from house arrest. We can only imagine Elizabeth's relief and happiness. Since March 1554, she'd lived under the shadow of the axe, fearing that she'd be executed as a traitor or assassinated. It had been a stressful and frightening time, but it was over. It is said that in November 1558, Elizabeth was sitting under a tree in the park at Hatfield reading when she learnt of her accession to the throne. According to one account, on hearing the news of her accession, Elizabeth uttered words from Psalm 118. The Latin she said that day translates to, "This is the Lord's doing. It is marvellous in our eyes." One of her first acts as Queen was to call together her first Council of State, which she did in the banqueting hall of Hatfield. And that banqueting hall is still standing today. You can also visit the oak tree in the grounds, although it's not the tree. That sadly died, but it was replaced with a new oak planted by our present Queen Elizabeth II in 1985. A plaque at the site reads, "This oak tree was planted by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II on the 22nd of July 1985 on the site of the original oak tree, under which Her Majesty the Queen Elizabeth I heard of her accession to the throne." Now tomorrow I'll be talking about an event which took place in Spain on the 19th of October 1469 and which had a major impact on Europe and which had links to the Tudors. Yes, the marriage of the famous Catholic monarchs Isabella I of Castile and Ferdinand II of Aragon, the parents of Catherine of Aragon and grandparents of Emperor Charles V and Mary I. Please do subscribe. You can click that subscribe button right there and hit the bell to be notified as these videos go live so that you don't miss out on that talk. Also on this day in Tudor history, the 18th of October 1541, Margaret Tudor, sister of King Henry VIII and eldest daughter of King Henry VII, died of a stroke. Margaret Tudor is a fascinating Tudor lady. She was sent to Scotland at 13 to marry King James IV of Scotland. She was widowed, divorced and unhappily married. She fled to England at one point, and she was the mother of Lady Margaret Douglas and grandmother of Mary Queen of Scots and Lord Darnley, and great-grandmother of King James VI of Scotland, King James I of England. What a life she had! And you can find out more about her in last year's video. You'll find a link to that in the description. Thank you for joining me. I will see you very soon. Take care. Bye-bye.